Good morning. Welcome this morning. It feels like we've really gone into our summer version of Help the Helpers. And we're so pleased to have Annette with us. Annette does many kinds of groups that are focusing groups and various emphases in these groups. And she's also a part of our community empowerment project. And she's done several other Help the Helpers, right, with us, with a special interest in the climate crisis. And Annette, you do wonderful work in finding ways of helping people to talk about that. Really subtle and attuned. And I've learned so much from you. So we're going to have both plan and spontaneity in our session this morning. So thank you, Annette.
Thank you, Lynn. It's great to be here. So the title today, Living with the Climate Crisis, is the name of a program created by let me get it right. It's the Climate Psychology Alliance out of the UK. And so I thought I would talk a little bit about that program, but also some other resources. And then I thought we could come back and see how we might like to spend our time. So I guess I'll come back to the program, the Living with the Climate Crisis program. It talks about many things that we can do with climate. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about an article that was published last year in January. And it's called Therapists' Experience of Climate Change, a Dialectic Between Personal and Professional. And to that author's knowledge, it's the first time the therapist's experience with climate change was covered. And so that's a very interesting article. And the one thing I learned in that article was this thing called terror management theory that maybe all of you know about, but it's basically the idea that the understanding that I get from it is that we are so afraid of death that we create things for us to live on. And I just really think that's interesting, that certainly for myself, when I get really scared about climate change, it is often about death. I go to thoughts of, maybe we better sell this house and go buy some land where I can farm so that I won't die. Like I do go to extreme views and concerns. And so there's that piece. And then the third link I shared with you is from the Yale program on climate change communications. They do surveys fairly regularly, and they take the pulse of climate change beliefs and concerns. And what I think is really telling of where we are at now is that, to give one stat, is that 66% of Americans say now that they are either somewhat worried or very worried. 30% are very worried, and the rest are somewhat worried. So now we have about 2/3 of Americans who are really worried. So the amount of worry is kind of at this more than a tipping point, right? It's very much now the majority. And yet only about, they said 28% say they look for information about solutions. And so in the Living with the Climate Crisis, they call this the delta, this kind of gap between we're worried and we're not in action. And I think this is an important place for focusing and for processing more broadly, because what gets in the way of the action? Right? What gets in the way of being with the feelings? Some of it might be that fear of death. It's just too big. I just don't want to go there. I'm just going to avoid it. I'm just going to go back to, I don't want to give things up. And some of it might be, in some ways, our privilege. So this brings me to the last link. So this is a blog I wrote about the need for catastrophic thinking, and it builds highly on Susan Kassouf's work. She wrote a paper, Thinking Catastrophic Thoughts, a Traumatized Sensibility on a Hotter Planet. And she talks about how it's much easier for people who haven't had to have catastrophic thoughts because they've had no other issues, big issues in their life. We can be not used to thinking about catastrophic thinking. And so this really crosses with intersectionality, right? And the need to look at our privilege. And maybe we are so able to just buy things that we don't have to think about it in a deep way. So there's worry, there's a sense of like people are worried and they are touching into it, but maybe there's something that gets in the way of taking action. And certainly you see this with, I think the billionaires are interesting sometimes at the extreme, right? We see people building bunkers and stuff like that. So like, oh, I'll just take care of myself, and not going like, well, maybe I need to sacrifice something. Maybe I need to have less. Maybe I need to find a way to live sustainably. And this is really hard. I personally, like I do take some action, and then I really am noticing the actions I don't take. I did it this morning. I went for a walk this morning in preparing for this, and I said, I have a latte. And I had a regular milk latte. I didn't have the oat milk latte. Normally at home we drink oat milk. I don't really buy milk at home anymore. But this morning I wanted the milk. I wanted the cow milk. And so I noticed that choice. And for me right now, there's a lot of just being grateful for the things I can still do, as there's this sense of we're not going to be able to have all of the abundance that we have now. It's just not going to happen. It's quite dire. The impacts are going to come on what we're able to farm. We already have that a little bit sometimes, right? Like we have diseases and outbreaks. Last year, the mango crops mostly failed in India because it was too hot, and the little blossoms failed. They got zapped by the heat before they could form mangoes. And we've seen that in other places. You see reduced crops, like it's happening in Ontario right now with strawberries. There's fewer strawberries than normal. So these impacts change what we can eat because of the heat and changes, but also because of, anyways, it's quite dire. It's quite depressing. So there's something about thinking catastrophic thoughts, to close my thought there, that I get hopeful, because I think, focusing can teach people how to have that welcoming attitude, right? That's a key part of why focusing works, is because we can be with uncomfortable feelings and we can welcome them. And then we can see what carries forward. We can see what right next step comes. And it's step by step. Of course, it takes time. And so that's hopeful. If we can show people how to have focusing more and more, then I believe we can build the courage to take more action and to work together, rather than maybe being stuck in this place of being worried. And I'm not saying that's everybody's experience. Of course, there's different places, but it seems like the majority, or a good 30% plus of Americans are worried and not in action. And so I thought that might be where some of you are. And these are a few ideas from this Living with the Climate Crisis program from Climate Psychology Alliance. All their materials are free, I will say. I gave you the link. There's a facilitator's guide, there's participant guide. So if this is something, a topic that's near to your heart, you might want to look into it as something you could, as a resource that you could use in groups or even just one-on-one with your clients. The second link I gave about the therapists, the dialectic, they certainly said, and I think it's still true, that most organizations, like professional schools, are not yet providing resources. So there's this kind of like delta there too, right, of a lack of support on how to deal with this topic professionally. And so we can look to these organizations that have resources. So the first one I wanted to show was some of the feelings that can come up with climate change. And I thought that perhaps we'd like to spend some time here, because especially in the US right now, so, a lot has happened in June. In, I think, June 7th, you guys had in New York City, orange air, apocalyptic looking consequences of the forest fires in Canada and the heat dome that was causing the air. And these are cascading effects, right? Where it's not just one thing that goes wrong, it's multiple things. So the heat dome that was there, I think over the Atlantic, was stopping the air from moving out. And so we have these cumulative or cascading or these feedbacks where it just, they pile on. And right now in Texas and many states around there, the heat dome that's happening there for 3 weeks now, at least, extreme heat. And then you start to have the power outages because people ramp up their air conditioning. And at some point we demand more from the grid than's possible. And then we're in very serious trouble because, if you lose your power and you can't air condition, then it's unbearable. And certainly in BC, it's a little bit different. A couple years ago in Vancouver, they had a heat dome. 700 people died, right? They don't usually have air conditioning in Vancouver. They don't usually need it. And same things have happened in other places. So that's one bucket I thought we might want to spend time with, is just our feelings about what is happening, what you are experiencing now, or what you've experienced. And then another bucket that we could look at is if you have clients who are very active in this. So I've talked about the bucket who are not active. There is a bucket who are active, and they get too active and they go to burnout because they find out about it and they immerse themselves in all the knowledge. They find out so much and then they go into action, and then very often they go into crisis because they get burnt out. And so then there's this learning to live sustainably and do this work while in many ways, right, still having joy, still having pleasure, still having a balance, and still living life. And so there's that bucket. And then the last one from this program that I thought we might be interesting is about telling our stories. And they use Marshall Gantz's work on public narrative, and how when we tell our stories, we convey the emotional quality of what's important here, and not just the data, because the data doesn't work. And so noticing maybe how it's affecting you and how you might tell that in a story, and how you could connect that to broader stories of us, and the story of now and the need for action. And so I'm going to just stop my screen and just invite people to share if any of those really resonate, or we could just have a wandering conversation given all that I shared. And I see Rosa's here. Hi, Rosa. I think we had such a lovely conversation last time that Rosa led. And so, yeah, we could wander, or we could focus a little bit, and we can also, of course, use the break rooms to focus, and we could wander for a bit and then focus in the breakout rooms.
Hi, Annette. I'm so glad to be here. So many different feelings as you were doing your very uh, rich presentation. I just felt like you were offering so much information and so many different perspectives in a very relaxed way. It was so yeah, I'm just really glad to be here. And I was especially called by that last thing you spoke about the narrative approach, about sharing our story of how we are as a way to, with this issue, as a way to open the conversation with people. So I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that at some point, or share a link with us about it. I just really want to thank you for being here and for doing what you're doing. So thank you.
Well, there's the link directly in the Living with the Climate Crisis. And yesterday, actually, I just Googled Marshall Gantz, and there's a playlist of a presentation. And the story that he shared, they showed a video of somebody sharing their story. It wasn't about climate change. It was about pride. Well, not pride, but coming out. And so the person's story, and I'm not going to remember the exact order, but there was he was sharing about kids who were hanging themselves in trees because they couldn't bear it. And then he shared his own life as a 7-year-old. He was in dance, and he was getting made fun of by the teacher, and then in high school being made fun of. So there was the joy of the dance, and then the being made fun of, and then how he was a teacher, and for 10 years he didn't come out, and how he regretted that, and then he did, and then there was a call to action. So those were kind of the elements that he wove through in telling the story. And so yeah, I think that would be a beautiful thing to do in breakout rooms, is just to be with, how is it touching us personally, and how does it connect to what we're doing, and inviting people into action. But these elements of hope, and hope is tricky too, right? I didn't talk about this, but there's some people, they're called post-doomers. So there's those who are doomers, who are just like, it's over. And the post-doomers are kind of being really realistic that because this stuff is so depressing, but because of the positive feedback cycles, it's kind of like the snowball effect. So many things are already in motion. Even if we were to stop all of our emissions today, there would be continued effects, because the heat that's in the system already will continue to melt some ice, which continues to let more heat in, right? It compounds. And so the post-doomers, they call it hopium, that the hope is really a drug, because it just lets us go, oh, we'll figure it out. Somebody's going to figure it out, and kind of pass the buck. And in reality, we all need to change and all do things. Like, we all have to, for all of us who have, I think, natural gas furnaces, or if you still have an oil furnace, like, we need to change those, our vehicles. Like, we personally are responsible for a lot, and we do need to make those changes over time. And there's people with a lot of power, or organizations, who, keep skewing things, all of the lobbyists and stuff. So there's like a sense of like, oh, we need hope. And at the same time, let us not be fooling ourselves about how dire it might be. And that can make it a double whammy. It's like you just get more worried and just feel like almost like it's almost hopeless, in the sense that we're definitely not going to like these ideas of 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius, which I forget what they are in Fahrenheit. Like we're kind of blowing right past that right now, right? But what we've already done and what we're still doing. So there's a certain amount of dread that comes.
I know that the doom and the post doom, but I'm thinking that the note that is most helpful to me is the David Attenborough series, and I find that just strikes the right chord. He's so articulate about the crisis, but also just showing us how resilient nature is, and how in a certain way simple it is to regenerate our forests, and all of his stuff about diversity in the rainforests and the oceans, and showing how very few people can make a big difference. Just those images of nature rejuvenating, I think, are so helpful, at least to me, because you have to have some kind of image and felt sense of what it looks like for for this problem to be having this feeling of a forward movement with this problem. And I think that just catapulting from dread to denial is is sort of the worst thing, but we need to have this alternative. Yeah, David Attenborough. He's like the grandfather of a voice for nature, and he has wonderful programs on many different channels. Our Planet, I think, is one of them, and I forget the names of them, but if you just Google David Attenborough, you'll find programs that really give you information but don't depress you. I'd be curious, because I'm curious about him, and how, from my point of view, how powerful he is. How many of you know him? Just raise your hands. I would say less than half, right? For me, he's so like a member of our household, and his voice is so familiar, and I find him so steadying.
This is such a powerful topic. Do you hear me okay? Sorry, my I'm wondering, for me, it feels like this is morning, and it's and I may need to get in in a kind of focusing way, it's big. It's big. So it feels, I'm a little bit like, maybe not shocked, but a little like that. So I don't know. That would help me.
Yes.
Yeah, I kind of echo what Sophie said. There's a hurt in me, like deep in me, like in my chest, like a tightness, like wanting to breathe and not being able to. Because you're right, Annette, I live up in in Hudson Valley up north. And I've noticed there's some produce that I can't find anymore. And I was wondering what happened, you know? And then I know what's happening. But there's a part of me that's ignorant, but there's a part of me that's aware. And then when I can't find what I'm looking for, I'm like, holy cow, you know, this is missing. And this is missing. And that's missing. And I do, you know, when you shared the links, I'm like, this is a topic that's so important and so of interest to me. And, you know, my little grandson, he's 9, and I did buy him a book about a couple of years ago for Christmas on understanding climate change and understanding all of this, because, you know, the little ones are the future. And I wish that I could talk about this topic without the parts where I want to cry. I mean, I wish that I could, you know, at the local library, have like this conversation with people. But I need to deal with the part of me that's teary all the time. I'll be like a horrible presenter. I'll be like with the tissues, like, you know, so I need to find it within, or I wouldn't be able to breathe. Like, how can I manage parts of me that are so emotional around the issue, so that I need a balance. I need something that can give me a balance so that I could be able to share it, you know, and also be able to have discussions with people, or young people, little ones.
Yeah.
That really does make all the difference. Because my mom was working on this 50 years ago. This was a discussion 50 years ago. And so she moved us up to Vermont, and we were recycling, and I was learning how to take all my cans and get my 5 cents and, you know, all of that stuff. And my husband and I have a value system that we live by based on all of this. We're not perfect by any stretch, but it is always in our mind. But then, like, my daughter does work. She works for WRC. She does work at the border. And it's really hot there right now in Texas, and I'm concerned about her. So this is, you know, and I'm really grateful, Annette, for how the way in which you're presenting this, because it's just done in such an emotionally intelligent way, because there is a lot of grief. And I do think you're eliciting grief, you know, in me, but that's a good thing, because that's what inspires action and concern. So yeah, so thank you. Yeah.
Opening it up for some sharing in the broader group. How was it to be with your own personal experience and process your feelings? And what wants to be shared now in the broader group?
I'd like to share something.
Yeah, Mary, go ahead.
Not really share, but I have a question, because at the very last of our conversation, Rosa brought up something called climate grief. And Rosa, can you say more about that?
Oh, I just wanted to mention that there's a whole, you know, there are therapists and activists and regular people who are looking at this from that perspective. One of the people whose work is really key in this is Joanna Macy, wrote a book a while ago called Despair and Empowerment, which has to do with how, when we get in touch with our grief in a safe and supportive container, where our grief for the world, because she writes about how a lot of therapists would tell her that she was just projecting, that she, you know, had family issues and she was just projecting her family issues onto the world. And so she felt she had to legitimate the fact that we can actually feel grief about what's happening in the larger world, that it isn't all just personal stuff, right? And so then she started these groups. They changed their name, and I don't remember what the new name is right now, but it's not called Despair and Empowerment Work anymore. It's called, but you can find it if you look for Despair and Empowerment Work. But she did all these groups with people where she discovered that if you hold safe space for people to voice their fear, their concern, their rage, their anxiety about what's going on in the world, that people come out the other side with a greater sense of what is my own role to contribute in this, right? So it's just a resource. And she's also an elder. She's like, I don't know how old she is right now, 80, 85, 88, 90, but she's still going. She's still talking and speaking. I mean, in a different way, at a different rate. But anyway, she's
94.
94. She's an elder. She's amazing. So thank you.
Well, breakout room, for me, it was easier to be in the breakout room with this topic because the grief is definitely present. And it was really very interesting to hear personal stories around it, and how I relate, and what I've done and forgotten, and what I don't do. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you for having the courage to do the work you do and bring it up and help us to be more present to it.
Yeah, Annette, for me, when we ended and went into the breakout group, I was connecting with my grief and all this pressure I had in my chest and stuff like that. So I really appreciated the breakout group, and I really thank my partner Liz, because I was able to come to this place of thinking, because Liz asked me a question. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was a profound question. And it was like, it allowed me to move forward. What am I going to do with all of this? It was just something that she asked. It was very simple. But what it allowed me to do was begin to reflect on my cultural view of the earth. We see everything as interrelated, and we see the earth and the rivers and and everything has energy and it's alive. And, how can I use the Latino culture is so much like Native American culture, and it's all about, those kinds of, the interrelatedness of everything and the aliveness of things. And I said, oh, so I could bring more of the aspect of nature and ancestry and elder views to the forefront of how to address climate change. I could do it my cultural way. I don't have to do it any other way. And I could look at other people that are doing it from that perspective of nature and honoring nature and honoring the earth as our mother, So I kind of came to a calmer place. I left my diet and a more ability to kind of know where I might go now. Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. You got some resourcing, it sounds like, from tapping into your ancestry and your culture, that you can bring that forward in your steps, whatever action you do now. Yeah. It's lovely. And I think that's so true. We each have to find our own way, right, with all of this. Okay, Liz.
I want to thank my partner, because we had a very rich discussion, and we just pulled out of the breakout rooms before I could say that. So thank you.
Yeah, lovely. And do you remember the question you asked her? I'm just curious.
I think it was something about having a sense of reverence for life. Well, how does that manifest? Or
Yeah. Yeah, it was something simple like that. Well, how does that manifest for you? It was so I had to go in, and then all this stuff came out. You see, it was just one simple question that opened up something for moving forward. So I really thank Liz for that.
I like the phrase Jean uses in a process model of what's your just right next step. I think sometimes we get overwhelmed by all that needs to be done. And it's nice to just go to what's right for you. What's your right next step? Or just right next step. Somebody told me yesterday, I had a changes group Saturday, and he said it in French. It was le plus petit pas possible. I liked that too.
But what does that mean?
Plus petit pas possible. What's the smallest possible step?
Oh, nice.
The very smallest possible step. Plus petit. I'll put that in the.
Quel est ton plus petit pas possible? Wonderful to hear that in French.
Yeah, Annette, I just wanted to thank you so much for what you presented today. Normally, I cut out at 9 for my day job, and I just kind of put all of that aside because you just brought up in me, and I shared with my partners in Breakout this deep, deep grief inside that I really hadn't touched upon. And thank you for the word hopium because I really sensed how much I lived, like this big part of me was in that place, and it gave it such a perfect name. And I just kind of discovered something really important, and it's leading me to check in for that just right next step. So this morning was like felt very big for me, and I appreciate what you brought up for us.
Thank you for sharing, Maria. That's so touching.
Yeah.
And the analytical part of me wants to know what it was, and the other part of me that just is just so grateful that somehow whatever it was led to this. It doesn't, in some ways it doesn't matter, and in some ways it does, because it's like, how do we do this work? So there's kind of like this, there's this sense of like all these missteps, right, of what doesn't work, and then sometimes we find what does work, and sometimes it's just we're just ready to be with it.
You know, Annette, you really opened up the space, I feel, for us to have our feelings and to think about how we feel about it, because there's so much desperation. This has to be done. This has to be done. This has to be done. And there's this overwhelm, but to be able to tap into my own experience, my own feelings, really helps with that next small step. Because otherwise, I have to be an activist. I have to do something really big, you know, and then that feels overwhelming, and then nothing happens.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to hear of some of the next small steps that people have come up with to take. The topic of democracy came up in our discussion, and the fact that our democracy is so damaged right now that it gets to be that felt more hopeless and a road to despair. So I need steps forward. And I'm trying to take some, but I would love to hear what steps forward people are taking. If anyone has things to share.
Hi, Nancy. I realized in my discussion with Annette that what I was adding to my own sense of despair was having to come up with steps when I didn't know. That was the most biggest. It's even the language. It's like playing around with blah. I don't have to do anything. I'm enough, you know, so that it's, I mean, they're fear-based or love-based. And I suppose what I despair when it's like there's so much invested, physically invested, emotionally invested, but also financially invested in defense, you know, just the arms, and no one actually asked, you know, how many are for peace? You know, how many are for peace? You know, hands up, and that's so that if I am definitely invested in peace, then I don't want anyone buying arms in my name, you know. So, but I had realized, I do realize, so it's that the self-realization that my thoughts of I have to do more, have to be more, is kind of adding to the paradigm that actually that it won't work itself out. So in some ways I want to align with myself in presence. I want to be self in presence, and that is enough. That it's not that I'm doing enough, but my thinking from there is enough. Because when I come out from that, I put something on my identity that I should be more. I should be able to talk about this stuff, you know. So with in that lovely resonance with Annette, it wasn't either or. It wasn't anything that I had to actually prove or or support myself with. It's almost it's beyond words, beyond language, which isn't actually very practical. But I feel my words will come more, or I'll be less fearful of talking out in a group, because I think that it's counterintuitive when it's actually not. It's loving when I don't have to say when I'm not ready, you know. So they're the steps that it's almost stepping back into the self and presence. So it's that place that the potential of focusing is a collective force, you know. But I can't prove it. I don't need to prove it. But that's the real politics, you know. It's the psychic politics in me that's aligned with love. That is enough, because that's all I can do, you know, is love myself and then others when that's discordant, you know. So that's the steps, is to do less and be more after today's discussion. And I find that I'm grateful, profoundly grateful for that more of doing nothing. So thanks, Annette, for facilitating that.
We had a related and slightly different angle into this. I'm very sparked by what Pauline shared. So first I want to reflect, and then I want to say what was coming up in our group. So this thing about how the pressure that we have to do more can just be overwhelming. And somebody else was speaking to that. I think I heard Steph speak to that as well, right? And it almost counterproductive, right? So like we feel like, oh, I have to become an activist, and then that feels overwhelming. And then, you know, we just go back to like focusing on things that feel a little bit more manageable. And so one of the things that came up in our group is how it can be helpful to validate the small steps that we are already doing, even if they don't feel like enough, as a way of resourcing ourselves. So it's this interesting, so moving beyond either or, as Pauline was saying, into this both and of, yes, I am doing enough. And then there's, I don't even want to say do more, because our whole culture is more and more and more, but more like, I don't know, like go deeper. Like, how might I be even more effective? Do less and be more effective or something, right? But this bit about how, of course, we want to grow in the difference that we're making, and yet how we tend to kind of minimize what we're doing as a way of how we can get lost in minimizing what we're doing, instead of doing a both and of really affirming what we're doing already, even if it's, you know, just raising a family or doing our best to support other people or whatever it is that we're doing. We're already doing a lot, and how to connect with that in a good way, and then have the what's my next step come from a very different place than not enough or do more. So yeah, something along those lines.
Maybe I'll just read the comment in the chat. Steph shares that, Nancy, what came up in our group was living by a value system that pans out to everyone in our sphere, especially our children. Everything from the small things we do, not replacing things we don't need, i.e. appliances, etc., to talking about why we make those choices. We probably can take one more share.
Oh, I could share one thing that I could do. Yeah,
Okay.
Nancy.
Yeah.
When Nancy asked that question, I immediately thought of my interest in really honoring Native American, Indigenous people and their love for the earth, and the fact that they have so much knowledge about how things interrelate in the ecosystem. And I want to see a little bit more of what they're doing and learning more. And also I love working with children and youth. And so I think that I'll continue maybe volunteering and reading climate change books with children and in the library up here. And I think I've mentioned before, in the Hudson Library, they have a little backpack that children and parents can rent out and go into nature. And I think like every library should have a little backpack for kids, and it has all these nature related stuff in it so that kids can become curious. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, I'm really interested in, you know, I read this article in the New York Times, I think it was the New York Times, about that we had at one point years ago, you know, hundreds of years ago, a little ice age. And it was when Native American culture was disseminated, and they had ways of honoring the land. And one that was taken, once they were gone, what they did affected the whole environment. And then a little mini ice age happened. And, you know, like we don't realize how interconnected we are to all of this. And so I think honoring Native American culture for me, and looking at what other indigenous cultures throughout the world are doing related to climate change, like I'm curious about that. So thank you, Annette, for kind of, and everybody's share, and has allowed me to kind of come to that place for myself.
Beautiful. Thank you for your share. And Dorothy's going to read the poem. I have this little book. I'll show you the book. It's actually, the book is really about relationships and trauma and sexual assault, really. But the one poem in it is about being a poet, and it resonated with me. And so, Dorothy, I'll invite you to read it. It doesn't have a title.
I just want to, speaking of being a poet, I just want to announce that August is going to be writing month, because people on vacation, on retreat, maybe having a little more space in August is a wonderful time to write. So each week we'll have a different writer, including Dorothy and Christine, and we'll have a writing month. So just want to make that announcement.
So Lynn, do you want something from us? Because I could send in a poem.
Well, we'll be writing in the
oh, okay.
Yeah, certainly send us a poem if you want. Your poem can be read at the end.
Okay, I'll send you a poem. It has to do with Zen, permanence, and nature.
Okay.
You can send it to me too, also, Anesi. That would be great.
Good.
I'm trying to find a home for it. I wanted it in an environmental space, but maybe I might send it to a Buddhist journal.
Thank you so much, Annette. We all got so much from that. Okay, Dorothy.
Okay, and thank you, Annette, for this poem. It really spoke to me. Rupi Kaur is born in India, a Sikh, and she emigrated to Canada. And as you said, she's written a lot about violence and abuse and love and loss. It sounds interesting. I want to get the book. Each chapter deals with a different kind of pain and healing a different heartache. It's just the way it's organized sounds wonderful. And today's poem. Your art is not about how many people like your work. Your art is about if your heart likes your work. It's about how honest you are with yourself.
Oh, you skipped a line. Did you?
Did I? It's about how honest you are with yourself. And
the original, the book has if your soul
Okay.
likes your work. Sorry. I might have sent you a version that doesn't have that line.
No. You probably didn't. I retype it because of my eyesight, and I probably left that. Let's see. I'm sorry. If your heart likes, okay, I'm just going to go again. Your art is not about how many people like your work. Your art is about if your heart likes your work, if your soul likes your work. It's about how honest you are with yourself. And you must never trade honesty for relatability.
Yeah. And it's dedicated to all you young poets, but I think we are all.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Have a wonderful week, everybody. And I believe that Charles Herr will be with us next Monday. Bye-bye now.